45 exhausted soldiers violently kick open a bedroom door, forcing their way inside. What they found shocked them. They found their master, Odysseus, making love with the immortal witch Circe. The hero of Trojan War, who claimed to weep daily for his wife in Ithaca, had been happily sleeping with the exact woman who had recently cursed his crew into squealing pigs, and he had been doing it for a full year. And the secret which had been buried in history is that he left Circe pregnant with a son who would eventually track him down and kill him. Stay till the end, and you will know how. This is the true story of the smartest man in the ancient world, Odysseus, the absolute genius who ended the 10-year Trojan War by sneaking an army inside a giant wooden horse, and yet this same mastermind got every single one of his friends killed and suffered for 10 extra years, all because he couldn't keep his mouth shut for 5 minutes. You've probably been taught that Odysseus was the ultimate good guy, the brilliant underdog, the loyal husband who spent 10 years trying to get back to his wife, surviving monsters and magic along the way. But you are about to see the real, unvarnished story of the ancient world's most famous survivor, which will make you wonder, if a man is responsible for this much death, deception, and collateral damage, why exactly do we call him a hero? When the Greeks conquered Troy, Hector's wife Andromache is holding her infant son, Astyanax. The baby is harmless, therefore any modern moral compass would say you spare the child. But Odysseus argues to the Greek generals that if this baby grows up, he might seek revenge. So, Odysseus personally ensures that this innocent infant is ripped from his mother's arms and hurled off the towering battlements of Troy to shatter on the rocks below. The war is over. All he has to do now is get on his boats, sail across the Mediterranean back to Ithaca, hug his wife Penelope, see his son Telemachus, and eat some lamb. Today, you can sail the Aegean and Ionian seas from Troy to Ithaca in less than 24 hours. Odysseus crossed those exact same waters in 10 years. And while we have always blamed Poseidon for this delay, the unsettling truth is that a massive chunk of this nightmare was entirely Odysseus' own fault. Right after leaving the ruins of Troy, Odysseus makes his first genius decision. Does he sail straight home to his weeping wife? No. He stops at a coastal city called Ismaros, home of the Cyclones, and raids the entire place for absolutely no strategic reason. His crew gets drunk on the beach, ignores the counterattack, and 72 Greeks are slaughtered in the sand. But this massive loss of life is just a warm-up for Odysseus' defining psychological flaw, his unquenchable ego. After a violent storm, the fleet lands on the island of Cyclops, and he and his men walk right into a giant empty cave, eat the cheese they find, and wait for a lavish gift. However, the host turns out to be Polyphemus, a massive, one-eyed Cyclops. He seals the cave with a giant boulder, grabs 2 of Odysseus' men, bashes their brains out on the floor, and eats them raw. Odysseus realizes he cannot kill the giant using physical strength. So he gets the giant incredibly drunk. When Polyphemus asks for his name, Odysseus relies on semantic manipulation. He says his name is Utis, which is ancient Greek for nobody. When the Cyclops passes out, Odysseus and his men drive a heated, massive wooden stake directly into the monster's single eye. Polyphemus wakes up screaming in agony, shouting to the other giants outside the cave that nobody is killing me. The other giants basically roll their eyes, assuming it to be a joke. The next morning, Odysseus ties his surviving men under the bellies of the giant's sheep, and they slip away. All they have to do is sail away in silence. But Odysseus' ego physically will not allow him to be a nobody. He wants the kleos, immortal fame and glory. So, as his ship is desperately rowing away, Odysseus stands at the back of his getaway boat and screams, "I am Odysseus, raider of cities, son of Laertes, who makes his home in Ithaca." Polyphemus happens to be the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. And now Poseidon knows exactly who blinded his kid. Therefore, Poseidon curses him. And this curse literally results in the agonizing deaths of every single man in Odysseus' crew. Every shipwreck, every monster attack, every drowned friend for the next 10 years traces directly back to Odysseus prioritizing his own brand recognition over the lives of his men. Now, you'd think a leader watching his men getting eaten by a giant will rush to get back to his home. But let's look at what actually happens when they land on the island of Aeaea, home to the immortal sorceress Circe. When the scouting party from Odysseus's fleet went to look for food, Circe invites them inside, drugs their wine, and literally turns them into squealing pigs. Odysseus, warned by the god Hermes and given a magical protective herb called moly, manages to resist her. He draws his sword, corners her, and forces her to swear an oath to turn his men back into humans. Mission accomplished? His men are human again. Time to pack up and leave? Wrong. Instead of packing up, Odysseus decides to stay. He moves into Circe's luxury palace and spends his nights having intercourse with the exact same witch who had just tried to turn his entire command staff into livestock. While his beloved Penelope is back in Ithaca weeping her eyes out, fending off over 100 aggressive men trying to steal his kingdom, Odysseus is on a supernatural vacation. Therefore, a full year passes, and his traumatized, exhausted men have to stage a desperate intervention. 45 battle-hardened survivors have to violently burst into the room, pull their captain aside, and actively beg him to remember his home, his wife, and his duty, just to get him to finally leave the witch's bed. He then leaves reluctantly. And remember the part where he left Circe pregnant and bore her a son who will ultimately come and kill Odysseus. We will discuss about that in a minute. Then came the Sirens, bird women sitting in a meadow of rotting corpses whose song promises infinite knowledge. Odysseus plugs his men's ears with wax so they can row safely. Immediately after, they navigate a narrow strait guarded by two nightmares, Charybdis, a massive whirlpool, and Scylla, a horrific monster with 6 heads. Odysseus makes a cold, brutal calculation. If he sails near Charybdis, everyone dies. If he sails near Scylla, he will lose exactly 6 men. He chooses Scylla, but he doesn't tell his crew what is about to happen. He arms himself, stands at the front of the ship, and watches helplessly as Scylla's long necks swoop down, snatching 6 of his best men who scream his name as they are dragged up the cliff and eaten alive. The survivors eventually land on Thrinacia, the island of the sun god. Odysseus warns them not to touch the sacred cattle, but they are stranded by storms for a month, and the men begin to starve. While Odysseus is off sleeping, his desperate crew slaughters the holy cows. Therefore, the moment they set sail again, Zeus strikes their ship with a massive lightning bolt. The vessel shatters. Every single man on the crew is drowned. The entire fleet is gone. Odysseus alone survives, washing up on the island of Calypso, where he is kept as a prisoner and lover for 7 more years before finally being ferried back to Ithaca in his sleep by the Phaeacians. Then we all know what happened. After 20 grueling years, Odysseus sneaks back home disguised as a beggar to find 108 arrogant suitors wrecking his palace and harassing his wife. When the men fail a brutal archery contest, the disguised king effortlessly strings his legendary bow, shoots clean through 12 axes, locks the doors, and teams up with his son to butcher every single one of them. The violence doesn't stop with the men who tried to steal his wife. Odysseus has his old nurse identify the 12 servant maids who had slept with the suitors during his 20-year absence. He forces these crying, terrified women to carry the bloody, mutilated corpses of their dead lovers outside into the courtyard. He makes them scrub the thick gore off the dining hall floor, and when the house is finally clean, he has Telemachus take them outside. They tie a single ship's cable around the courtyard and string all 12 women up by their necks, hanging them in a row. The text explicitly notes how they kick their feet for a while until they slowly choke to death. And then there's Melanthius, the disloyal goatherd. Odysseus doesn't just execute him, he has him dragged out into the courtyard, slices off his nose and his ears, violently rips off his genitals to feed raw to the dogs, and then hacks off his hands and feet, leaving him to bleed out in the dirt. When we read this ending today, it makes us genuinely sick to our stomach. And we have to ask ourselves, how on earth do we comfortably call this man a hero? Odysseus isn't the hero because he is morally pure. He is the hero because he is the ultimate ruthless survivor. He utilizes metis, he lies, he manipulates, he sacrifices his own people when the situation demands it. To the ancient Greeks, his ability to outviolence and outthink his environment wasn't a flaw. It was the ultimate evolutionary flex. But even the ancients knew that you cannot run that brutal algorithm forever without the karma eventually catching up to you. Now comes the darkest part of Odysseus' downfall. In the ancient Greek epic cycle, there was a sequel to the Odyssey, a lost poem called the Telegony. Odysseus, before leaving Circe, made her pregnant. Circe gave birth to a son named Telegonus. Years later, long after Odysseus has grown old, reigning in Ithaca, Telegonus sets sail to find the father he never knew. He lands on the shores of Ithaca and, not realizing where he actually is, begins raiding the local cattle to feed his hungry crew. Odysseus, the aging, ruthless defender of his territory, marches down to the beach to fight off the invader. Father and son clash violently in the surf, completely unaware of who the other is, and in the chaos of the battle, Telegonus strikes Odysseus with a magical spear tipped with the poisonous spine of a stingray. Therefore, as Odysseus bleeds out on the sand, looking up at the son he abandoned, he realized that he has been killed by the living consequence of his own past actions. The Telegony delivers the final, devastating reality of the survival algorithm. You cannot leave a trail of broken lives, dead friends, and reckless arrogance, and expect to walk away clean. The man who survived the greatest war in history, who conquered monsters and gods by treating everyone else as disposable collateral damage, was ultimately killed by his own forgotten son. Odysseus isn't remembered because he was good. He is remembered because, in the brutal dawn of human history, he was the only one willing to do whatever it took to win, until his own legacy finally inevitably caught up with him. In the end, we should all remember, you reap what you sow.